So hi everybody, and welcome back to the Alphaweibchen Bonus Clips. We've got another quickie for you about resilience today, and I'm actually going to talk about the opposite of what we've been doing so far. We've been focusing on what are things that help resilience and help boost your strength in dealing with difficulties and adversity. Today I want to talk about some of the things that actually are destructive and tend to inhibit our resilience and negatively impact it. And the number one thing I'm going to focus on is negative thinking patterns. Now, some of you are probably going, okay, negative thinking patterns, I'm all over that. I do that all the time. And I'm sure you do, because the fact of the matter is that's what we are programmed to do. Biologically speaking, our brains are programmed to look for danger and to help us to survive. Now, the reality is that most of the challenges we're faced with in modern life are not life-threatening. They're not a question of survival. And so reverting to that natural instinct we have and that fight or flight response actually prohibits us from dealing with those challenges as effectively as we might otherwise do. And so I want to talk about what some of these standard negative thinking patterns are so that we can recognize them when we start to fall into those traps, if you will, and make sure that we stop ourselves from going down that road and take a more constructive approach to dealing with the challenges. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. And there are 5 primary negative thinking patterns that tend to crop up again and again. And everybody kind of has their preferred way of negative thinking, and you'll see as I discuss these different patterns, you say, oh yeah, I do that all the time. And there are other ones that you might say, oh no, not really me. The point is I want to cover all 5 of them so that you know what types of thinking patterns exist, and then you can be on the alert for them and see when you start to fall into the one or the other so that you can control what happens with your responses based on that. Okay, so let's start with the first one. And the first one, this is one of my favorite ones because I am really good at this, or at least I think I am, and this is the trap of mind reading. And very often we tend to think and we assume that we know what other people are thinking. And so I'll give you an example. When I'm about to get on stage and give a presentation and I start to feel under pressure and I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go, then I start to think, oh, they're all going to be sitting there and they're going to be thinking that I don't have the knowledge to do this and that I don't have the credibility, and they're going to be wondering how I even got here and questioning the decision to hire me for this job. I don't know that that's what they're thinking, but this is one of those negative thinking patterns that tends to crop up. We do this in personal relationships as well. If we have a challenge with another person in our lives, be that a partner or a spouse or a child, oh, they're thinking this, and we assume we know what's going on in that other person's head, and we don't. Now, the problem with this is that we tend to think that other people are having negative thoughts about us. And that causes us to withdraw. And so we withdraw, we isolate, and we build up walls. And that has a very, very big negative impact on relationships. We also start to engage, when we do engage with those other people, from that negative standpoint of, oh, I think you're thinking something bad about me. And so we become defensive, or we start to attack back, even if there's nothing to attack. And so our communication patterns get all screwed up. All right, so that's negative thinking pattern 1. Negative thinking pattern 2 is the me trap. And this is where whenever we're faced with something that is a challenge or a difficulty, we think that we are the sole cause of that setback or that problem in our lives. And so, for example, if something doesn't go well at work, you say, oh, it's all my fault. I'm the one who didn't prepare right. I didn't communicate the right information. I didn't do all the background work. And you take complete responsibility for everything that has gone wrong. Now, you might be partially responsible for things that go wrong, but very seldom are we the sole cause for setbacks that we're dealing with. And by putting all of the cause and blame on ourselves and accepting that sole responsibility, what we're doing is we're causing a lot of guilt and a lot of sadness in our own lives. And so we start to feel, I've disappointed everybody. I've screwed it all up. We're not going to be successful because of me. And when we assume that amount, that huge, unacceptable amount of guilt, and we start to feel very, very sad, it saps our energy. We start to despair, And we also don't know how to engage with the people in our lives because we feel like we are such a disappointment to the people that we work with or live with. We start to isolate ourselves from them so that we can stop causing them harm, so to speak. Okay, so the third thinking trap that we fall into is the them trap. And the them trap is pretty much the opposite of the me trap. In the me trap, we give ourselves the sole responsibility for all of the setbacks and difficulties that we're facing. In the them trap, we think that someone else or circumstances are the sole cause of the difficulties that we're facing. And so in this trap, we're not accepting any part of the responsibility at all. We're placing all of the blame on somebody else. And then we would put ourselves in the victim role. And so, the thinking goes along the lines of, they made all the wrong decisions. They didn't prepare this correctly, and now I'm the one suffering. They made the wrong promises, and now I can't deliver. They did this, and I don't accept any of the responsibility. Now, the problem with this is twofold. Number one, it makes us feel like we don't have any control over things, and that's not true, because we do have control over our destiny and the direction that our life goes. We have control over contributing constructively to the problems that we face or dealing with them in destructive patterns. And this them trap ends up with us feeling a huge amount of anger and aggression, and that causes destructive behavioral patterns. And so we tend to lash out at other people. We tend to start looking for fights when there doesn't need to be a fight, and that gets in the way of looking for solutions. Okay, so that's number 3. The fourth one is hopelessness. And this hopelessness trap is when we think that negative things that we come across are going to impact all aspects of our life, and we have no control over it. And so the thinking goes along the lines of, there's nothing I can do about this. It's going to start with a problem in my personal life, and that's going to carry over into my professional life. And before you know it, I have no positive outcome anymore, and I can only see dark. And there's nothing I can do about it. And that's the key thing with hopelessness. It's this thought pattern, everything is going to hell, and there's nothing I can do about it. Okay, now that leaves us feeling, first of all, exhausted. We go down this road of helplessness. We give up control over anything. We start to feel like there's nothing we can do. And then as a result of that, we stop taking any action. We become very passive because we think that we can't do anything anyway. So why bother trying? And that saps our energy and ends up, giving up. We end up giving up, not doing anything. And that just prolongs the pain, so to speak. We also tend to withdraw. And as we withdraw, we're no longer able to get help from the connections, from the resources. We're also no longer even to tap into our own intellectual resources because we've just decided to pull back and let the world go to hell. And so it's a bad thinking trap to fall into. They all are. The fifth one that I want to talk about is catastrophizing. And I've saved this one for last because this is another one of my personal favorite thinking patterns. I do this a lot. The idea with catastrophizing is when something goes wrong, when we have some setback in life, we start to blow it all out of proportion. And so, let me again give you an example because I do a lot of presenting. If I have a presentation that goes bad, then what I end up start doing is saying, oh my God, this was terrible. Everybody in the room now thinks that I'm a joke, and they're going to tell everybody they know, and they're going to start posting online, and I'm never going to get another contract. And since I'm never going to get another contract, I'll have to close up my business, and I'm going to have to default on the mortgage on my house and sell my house, and I won't be able to help support my son to go to university. And it goes on and on and on. And this catastrophizing, this is it's when your brain becomes a runaway train and it starts going around and around and around and coming up with one worst case scenario that's even worse than the previous worst case scenario. And you can't get out of that sequence anymore. You just keep finding how everything is going to get worse and worse and worse. So, with catastrophizing, essentially what you're doing is you're massively overestimating the threat of this difficulty that you're facing. And you're also, in parallel, massively underestimating the resources that you have to deal with the threat or with the difficulty. And so you end up putting yourself into this state of agitation. Your mind goes around and around and around in increasingly big circles of destruction, if you will. And you become super anxious and nervous and fearful. And that has the result that you're not able to focus anymore, you're not able to look for solutions, and you can't really tap into all of the resources at hand that can help you deal with the difficulty you're facing in a good and beneficial manner. And with all of this energy being consumed by this runaway train in your brain, you're lacking then the energy to actually take action and do something that's going to be beneficial and constructive. So those are the 5 thinking patterns, and this has gotten a little bit long for a quickie, so I'm going to summarize with that and then come back with you tomorrow about, okay, great, so these are the traps we fall into. How do we get out of them again? So again, it is the me trap, the them trap, mind reading, helplessness, and catastrophizing are the 5 negative thinking patterns that we tend to fall into, but we don't have to stay in those traps. There are ways to get out. So tune back in tomorrow for some tips on how to get out of those traps and approach challenges in a more resilient and a more positive and constructive manner.